Here is a continuous story about Buddha and death, Martu exploring his experiences and teachings on the subject. In the grand city of Kapilavastu, Prince Siddhartha Gautama lived a life of luxury and comfort. His father, King Shuddhodana, had carefully built a world for him where suffering did not exist. Beautiful gardens, elegant halls, and joyful celebrations surrounded him, shielding him from the realities of life. The king feared that if his son saw pain or suffering, he might renounce the world, fulfilling an old prophecy that predicted Siddhartha would either become a great king or a great spiritual leader. But fate had other plans. One day, Siddhartha, curious about the world beyond the palace, convinced his charioteer Shana to take him outside the golden gates. As they traveled through the city, he saw something he had never seen before. A frail old man, bent with age, struggling to walk with a stick. The prince was puzzled. "What is wrong with that man, Chana?" he asked. "That, my prince, is old age. It comes to all who live long enough," Chana replied. Siddhartha was troubled. He had never known that youth and strength were temporary. As they continued, he saw another sight, a sick man groaning in pain, his body weak and trembling. "What is wrong with him?" the prince asked again. "He is ill, my prince. Sickness is part of life." The prince's heart grew heavy. If age and sickness were unavoidable, what else lay ahead? As they went further, they encountered a funeral procession. People mourned as they carried a lifeless body, draped in cloth, toward the cremation grounds. The air was thick with sorrow. "Channa, what has happened to this man?" Siddhartha asked, his voice shaking. "My prince, he has died. This is the fate of all living beings. No one escapes death." Siddhartha sat in silence. The laughter of the palace now seemed distant. The food, the music, the riches, none of it could stop aging, sickness, or death. A deep sadness took root in his heart. Returning to the palace, he found no comfort in his old life. He saw his father's face filled with expectations, his wife Yasodhara's eyes glowing with love, and his newborn son Rahula sleeping peacefully. But now he knew. One day they too would grow old, fall sick, and die. How could he live in comfort when suffering was the destiny of all? That night he lay awake, his mind filled with questions. What was the purpose of life if it ended in death? Was there a way to escape suffering? The next morning he saw a fourth sight, a wandering ascetic, dressed in simple robes, his face calm and peaceful. Unlike the old man, the sick man, and the dead man, this ascetic seemed free from sorrow. "Who is he?" Siddhartha asked. "He is a monk, my prince. He has renounced the world in search of truth," Jana replied. Something stirred within Siddhartha. Perhaps there was an answer to suffering. Perhaps there was a way beyond death. That night, while the palace slept, he made his decision. He kissed his wife and son goodbye, knowing he might never return. Silently, he mounted his horse with Channa by his side and left Kapilavastu, leaving behind his royal life in search of enlightenment. Years passed. Siddhartha became a wandering seeker, meditating in forests, learning from great teachers, and testing his own limits through severe asceticism. Yet no answer satisfied him. He starved himself, endured pain, and lived in solitude, but death still loomed over all existence. One evening, exhausted from his efforts, he sat beneath a great Bodhi tree. That night, in deep meditation, he saw the truth, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, the endless suffering of beings trapped in ignorance. He realized that clinging to life and fearing death only deepened suffering. The key was not to escape death, but to understand it. Everything was impermanent. Life was a river, constantly flowing. Holding on to anything, youth, wealth, even life itself, was like trying to grasp water. As dawn broke, Siddhartha opened his eyes. He was no longer the prince who feared death. He had awakened. He was now the Buddha, the enlightened one. With newfound wisdom, he traveled from village to village, teaching people the truth of impermanence. When people mourned death, He reminded them, nothing lasts forever. Like waves in the ocean, we rise and fall, but the ocean remains. Let go of attachment, and you will find peace. One day, a grieving mother, Kisa Gotami, came to him carrying the body of her dead child. Please, Lord, bring him back to life, she pleaded. Buddha looked at her with compassion and said, Bring me a mustard seed from a house that has never known death. Hope filled Kisa Gotami's heart. She ran from house to house asking for a mustard seed, but every home she visited had known loss. Every family had lost a father, a mother, a brother, or a sister. Slowly she realized the truth. Death was universal. She returned to Buddha, tears in her eyes, but peace in her heart. She laid her child's body down and became his disciple, learning to see death not as an end, but as a natural part of life. Buddha continued to teach until his own final days. At the age of 80, lying beneath the shade of a sala tree, surrounded by his disciples, he gave his last words. All things are impermanent. Work diligently for your own liberation. With that, the Buddha entered Mahaparinirvana, the state beyond birth and death, beyond suffering and attachment. His body was gone, but his teachings lived on. His wisdom, like the light of 1,000 suns, continued to guide those seeking freedom from suffering. Even today, when we face loss, when we fear death, his words remind us nothing is permanent. Do not grieve, but awaken. Only by embracing impermanence can we find true peace. And so the Buddha's understanding of death was not one of sorrow, but of liberation. For in accepting the impermanence of life, one finds the path to eternal wisdom.